Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. Former Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has announced the creation of the Growth Plus Association, a new political initiative that has drawn support from a portion of Law and Justice MPs. Now, the development comes as the opposition party itself faces declining polling figures, internal strategic debates, and increasing competition from far-right political forces, alongside a scheduled parliamentary session as well. So let's talk about the latest, and for that we're joined by Aleks Szczerbiak, Professor of Political Science, University of Sussex. Good to have you with us.
Morning, Sasha. It's good to be with you again.
Let's start first of all with the basics here. So it's not a party, it's an association. What exactly is this? And it's drawn a quarter of Law and Justice MPs, but what is it at its core?
Yeah, so it's really an attempt to shore up Mr. Morawiecki's position within Law and Justice. It's a divided party. There are two factions, one of which basically feels that the main threat to Law and Justice is on the political right through the two confederations, if you like, the Radical Right Confederation and the Grzegorz Braun's even more radical right Confederation of the Polish Crown. And then you have Mr. Morawiecki's faction, who believe that the party needs to kind of reach to the political centre much more. They're kind of much more technocratic, much more modernising. I mean, these are still, very conservative politicians, but they believe that strategically Law and Justice needs to pivot to the technocratic centre. But there's also a personality element here, because Mr. Morawiecki, he was Prime Minister. He would like to have a very prominent role in Polish politics. He'd like to be Prime Minister again. He has a large group of politicians that follow him, about 40 or 50 of them, who are worried, but they're worried about their position within the party because their opponents in the hardline faction appear to have had the upper hand from the point where Przemysław Czarnek, one of their leaders, became the Prime Minister designate. So it's really an attempt to try and shore up Mr. Morawiecki and his faction. So there's both a programmatic element to it, but also an element of personal ambition and personalities.
Yeah, you mentioned personal ambition. Let's talk about personality as well. I mean, right now still, and for many years, Law and Justice has been guided by its leader, Jarosław Kaczyński, and he generally, I think, doesn't like to really share influence and power. So, I mean, looking also at some of the visuals from the last 24 hours, him still standing nearby with Morawiecki doing that announcement, asking also for money, fundraising for the party. How do we interpret this? I mean, is this now Kaczyński waning? Is he being pushed out? How will he react to all this?
Well, this is very interesting because, nobody really wants a split at this stage. Jarosław Kaczyński doesn't want it because he doesn't want further divisions on the Polish right. He wants to try and consolidate Law and Justice as much as he can. He was hoping that people would consolidate around Przemysław Czarnek. I think that Mr. Morawiecki's faction also doesn't want a split at this point, because the problem is, Polish political history shows that when you get one of these kind of breakaway groupings from one of the big major parties, there's a kind of an upsurge of interest. It goes up to, 10, 11, 12, 15% sometimes in the polls. But then after a few months, it starts to recede. So this is not a good point for Mr. Morawiecki either, to have a split if he wants to form his own political formation. The optimal time, in a sense, for both is about kind of 4 or 5 months before the parliamentary election, because at that point, Mr. Kaczyński can marginalize Mr. Morawiecki and his supporters by excluding them from the candidates list, which means that he stops there being a longer-term problem of factionalism after the next election. But it's also a better time for Mr. Morawiecki because it means he can develop that political momentum that will carry him through to the next election. The problem here is that we're in a very dynamic situation, and whatever the rational calculations might be, sometimes events like what Mr. Morawiecki's forming this new grouping can actually set off a political dynamic which can lead to a much quicker resolution of these matters, which isn't necessarily what rationally both sides would want.
But at the same time, I mean, looking also what's happened from last night, I mean, you were talking about that no one wants to split. And I think I just want to draw your attention. This is actually a tweet, an X rather, from the Law and Justice spokesperson calling on, in short form, the attention of party members, looking at very much to telling them, well, you know, hang on, according to this law, it's forbidden without the consent of party authorities. Goes on to remind them of what they're doing shouldn't be done, and says unity is the most important thing. So does that show that Kaczyński is afraid that this might indeed be a beginning of a split?
I think this is where that question of political dynamics could come into play, because on the one hand, I mean, if he just allows Morawiecki to just carry on the way that he is, that strengthens centrifugal forces within the party, because it basically shows to the factions that there are no consequences if they act in this way, in the way that Morawiecki has done, which is quite a provocative move, really, on his part. I think the key thing here, though, is that it's the Law and Justice spokesman that said this. I mean, I think I think we should look to wait and see what's the next thing that Jarosław Kaczyński said. In some ways, I think the Bochenek, the party spokesman, is a bit of an outrider. He's kind of sending a warning shot to Morawiecki and his group. But it's not got Kaczyński's fingerprints on it. So he can still kind of slightly rise above the fray and say, no, to unite the party and bring it together. On the other hand, he's got the party spokesman taking the harder line and saying to both Mr. Morawiecki and anybody who wants to engage in factional activity, no, you know, this is not acceptable. We're going to come down on this. But as I say, the problem here is the dynamics, and Mr. Bohenek's move, although it might be a kind of a clever chess move by Mr. Kaczyński, could then set off a dynamic which leads to those centrifugal forces accelerating and a split happening faster than both sides would want.
I also want to get your sense, I mean, looking at not just party politics here, but also on the bigger international frame, we've also got positive, let's say, backing. We've got the U.S. ambassador to Poland, was saying very much like, I love this guy, pointing to Morawiecki. He's also got a close relationship with Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. He's head of the ECR across Europe as well. So what about that kind of backing? Does that, let's say, embolden him to do this? And let's look at the timing. I mean, 2027 is still a bit away, but tell us a bit what those kind of, let's say, backings do to all this.
I think that's really important. I mean, there have been factions within Law and Justice in the past, and indeed there have been splits within the party, but there are a number of important differences with the situation at the moment. One, Law and Justice is not the hegemonic force that it was on the right. It has challenges on the right, and therefore the costs of leaving are not seen to be so high. Number two, Mr. Kaczyński, who we've talked about, his position is much weaker than it was, and he's also making a lot of political mistakes. He held the right together. His position is weakening, which is encouraging centrifugal forces. You've got the point about party funding that you mentioned. The reason Mr. Kaczyński is making this appeal is because the party has had its state party funding stopped by the finance minister, which again makes it easier for a breakaway. And finally, the point that you make, which is really important, which is that you have a very significant political figure, Mr. Morawiecki, a former prime minister, who's probably, apart from Mr. Kaczyński, the best known Law and Justice leader. He's still, when people ask who should be the Law and Justice the candidate for the next prime minister, that's the person that most people say, and a lot of that is simply because he's just the one that they happen to know. So that, together with the fact that he's got a sizable faction of about 40 or 50 followers, which is a lot, plus the fact that, as you say, he's well known on the international stage, he's got that kind of credibility and name recognition, this makes it probably the most serious challenge to Law and Justice unity that the party has ever faced.
All right, so this is an interesting development. We'll be, of course, following it. Look, thanks for breaking it down for us. Always a pleasure. Aleks Szczerbiak there, professor from the University of Sussex. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Always my pleasure.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.